Well, the Touchstone Center began as basically as an experiment to really investigate and look at the nature of the imagination of children, and to see how, through projects that we would do in the schools, how we can connect children not only to their own imagination, but to the sense that the imagination is a universal aspect of ourselves that is unique to the human life, but also something that might have its evolutionary roots in the whole natural world. And one of the things that we're particularly interested in is how, in fact, we can take various images and take those images, particularly images of the natural world, like trees or birds and air and clouds, and how we can actually have children interact with those qualities of the natural world so that they not only see through their own imagination the life of these things, but almost in some wonderful transformative way become the clouds and become the trees and become the birds and really feel and empathize and sense what the life of that quality of the natural world is really about. So that is in essence what kind of motivated me, was this major question rather of what is it about the imagination, particularly in children, that seems to be at the center of their lives and the center of their sense of playfulness? What is it that it starts this process, and how do we continue it? How do we nurture it so that it has a life of its own, way beyond just childhood itself? The poetic perception that often we think of as adults as being something uniquely adult, I really don't think that's the whole story. I think really what poetry really is about on some level is where it begins, and it begins literally in childhood. And it isn't necessarily with the written poem for the child, but it's more of a means of perceiving the world, of seeing the world on a poetic, experiential basis. And it's not something we spend very much time in schools kind of nurturing that poetic aspect of childhood, but certainly through our experience with Touchstone, it's been very obvious to me now that all children have this enormous, wonderful capacity of perceiving things literally on a poetic level. So much of my interest as a poet in this sense is how do we evoke and invoke that quality of poetic perception in the child. How to keep it alive, and in the process of doing so, obviously I have to keep it alive in myself. So it kind of works both ways at once. And one of the things that certainly has been a deep inspiration for me has been the insights that children have, again, into this poetic sense of the world. Insights that sometimes they're not fully aware of until it's brought out. And again, it has nothing to do with necessarily their writing it down or even drawing it. It has a lot to do with a kind of sense of conversation that a child can have with an object, or with the sense of the natural world, with themselves, with their sense of dreaming. All qualities of childhood which tend to get pushed aside as they get older and forgotten. And then when one comes in midlife and thinks, oh my gosh, what happened to that ability that I had? It becomes a problem, how to kind of resurrect that. Part of the work of Touchstone, and certainly part of the work poetically on my end, is finding the different ways that we can work in and around those questions of the poetic sensibility of the child. And again, it's a two-way street, so as you do that, one's own poetic sense has to be nurtured and kept alive. So we're kind of in partnership on that level. Both the projects, the tree and the bird, grew out of a whole year spent on each of these images, working with children, investigating, in a sense, the imagination of the bird and the imagination of ourselves inside the bird, and the sense of the tree as a form of knowledge and the tree of knowing. And both kind of represent, in different ways, the philosophical intent of the projects themselves. The idea that the imagination is also about opening and closing. It's about looking in and looking out. And in this case, we're using the metaphor of the bird, and the life of the bird that lives inside of us, the bird of imagining, that can both see outward and inwardly. And this, in a sense, is sort of its home for the time being. So the fact that it opens and closes like this, and it has that whole kind of, again, image of the way the imagination itself works, seems a kind of wonderful parallel. And with the tree, same thing. The idea that the tree inhabits a space of its own imagination, of its own thoughtfulness, and how do we reach that way of thinking? How do we look at the tree as a means of thought itself? So both objects, sculptural objects, kind of resonate, it seems to me, with the very poetry that we were trying to reach in the first place. Well, I think it's wonderful that they're in a children's museum, and in particular the Brooklyn Children's Museum, a place that nurtures and respects childhood, and that I think that having them here says something to children, that the fact that much of the work here, the writings by the children and the whole way in which we approach the project really comes from children, and it's the sense of dialogue between the adult and the child, I think, is kind of confirmed here somewhat.